Imagine this. Evolution was supposed to reward intelligence. The smarter you are, the better you survive. You invent tools, you find medicine, you plan ahead, you solve problems before they kill you. By the cold math of Darwin's theory, the brilliant ones should be the most successful breeders of all. But in the 21st century, in America and across the developed world, we see the opposite. The higher the education, the fewer the children. The sharper the mind, the greater the chance of an empty nursery. It sounds absurd. It sounds like a glitch in the operating system of nature. But it is real, and it is measurable. The paradox goes like this. Intelligence gave us the ability to outweak death. And now, that same intelligence is persuading us not to create life. This is not a question about whether people love children. Many do. It is not about biology either, because biologically nothing has changed. Women can still conceive. Men can still father. What has changed is the human imagination. We now have the power to imagine alternatives to family. A different kind of immortality, through careers, art, wealth, ideas, influence. And once those options exist, instinct no longer rules alone. Let's go back to a lecture hall in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the 1990s. A sociology professor at Harvard is explaining Darwinian fitness. In nature, success is measured in offspring. A young woman raises her hand and interrupts. But if that's true, she says, then half of us in this room are evolutionary failures. The class laughs, but not entirely comfortably. Years later, surveys showed that a surprising number of Harvard graduates never went on to have kids. Many had dazzling careers, but no cribs in their living rooms. That student's joke turned out to be a prophecy. The numbers bear it out nationwide. According to the CDC, America's fertility rate in 2023 was about 1.6 children per woman, well below the 2.1 needed to maintain the population. For the highly educated, the figure is even lower. Pew Research reports that nearly half of childless U.S. adults under 50 say they don't ever expect to have kids. Among women with advanced degrees, more than a third remain child-free. These are not accidents or medical tragedies. Most describe it as choice. Why would intelligence turn against reproduction? To answer that, we have to see how intelligence itself rewrites the rules. Every other animal is a prisoner of instinct. A bird does not debate whether to build a nest. A salmon does not weigh the pros and cons of swimming upstream. But humans invented choice. And once choice enters the picture, biology becomes negotiable. Listen to how people explain their decisions. A neuroscientist in Los Angeles says, "My research is my child." A couple in New York with double incomes say, "We'd rather travel the world than pay for daycare." A climate activist in Portland says, "I cannot bring a child into a collapsing planet." These are not excuses, they are coherent worldviews. Here is where the paradox deepens. Darwin told us nature selects the fittest. But intelligence, the very trait that should maximize fitness, now whispers reasons not to reproduce. Intelligence, it seems, is clever enough to dismantle its own evolutionary advantage. To make this more real, consider famous lives. Nikola Tesla, the genius who gave us alternating current and dreamed wireless power, never married, never had children. He said his mission consumed him completely. Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, two of the brightest lights of 20th century philosophy, made a pact to live without children. They saw ideas as their true legacy. Oprah Winfrey, one of the most influential women in America, has no biological children. Instead, she speaks of her work, her mentorship, her foundation, as her form of parenthood. Each case is different, but the pattern is the same. When you can create on the level of culture, you may feel less compelled to create biologically. But this is not just about celebrities or intellectual elites. In America's cities, the dink lifestyle, double income, no kids, has become a recognizable identity. Couples enjoy careers, apartments, restaurants, vacations, freedom from diapers, and tuition bills. For them, the absence of children is not a gap. It is a design. The data show a widening divide. In rural and working-class America, family size is still larger, and child-free adults are less common. In college-educated metropolitan circles, child-free life is mainstream. This is not only cultural, it is economic. Raising a child in the U.S. now costs an estimated $300,000 by age 18, not including college. Add the burden of student debt, housing costs, and fragile health care, and the rational calculation for many is, not now, maybe never. And yet, economics alone does not explain it. Many child-free professionals could afford kids if they wanted to. What stops them is not always money, but meaning. They see meaning in other pursuits. To write a book, to start a company, to change a field, to live for personal growth. For them, children are not the only path to fulfillment. This is where philosophy enters. For centuries, having children was seen as destiny, duty, or divine command. Now it is one option among many. For some, freedom itself becomes more sacred than parenthood. This is new in human history. Darwin never imagined this world. His theory assumed that traits leading to more reproduction would always spread. But intelligence has produced contraception, financial planning, long careers, urban living, cultural aspirations, environmental fears. It has built 1,000 exit ramps from the highway of instinct. Does that mean the intelligent are sabotaging their own survival? Some researchers think so. Evolutionary psychologist Satoshi Kanazawa has argued that high IQ is correlated with lower fertility, and that this could, over time, reduce the average intelligence of the population. If the smartest reproduce least, the future may belong to other traits. But others push back. Intelligence is not only genetic, it is environmental. A child born in poverty today still has access to information no ancient genius could dream of. Public schools, online education, digital tools, all raise cognitive ability beyond what genes alone predict. In this view, cultural inheritance may matter as much as biological inheritance. Richard Dawkins offered a helpful lens. In his book, The Selfish Gene, he argued that genes are not the only replicators. Ideas replicate too. He called them memes. By that logic, a scientist with no children may still outcompete a parent by spreading ideas that shape millions. Tesla had no kids, but his memes, electricity, innovation, ambition are everywhere. Oprah has no children, but her influence saturates American culture. By the metric of memes, they are prolific. So perhaps Darwin's paradox is only half a paradox. Biological fertility may fall among the educated, but cultural fertility soars. We are shifting from survival of the fittest genes to survival of the fittest ideas. Still, the tension remains. If America's most educated continue to skip children, what happens when their values are not transmitted biologically? Can culture alone sustain them? Or will less educated, more fertile groups reshape the nation demographically? Already, demographers note that in the U.S., more religious and less educated populations have higher fertility. Over time, that could shift the cultural balance. If secular, urban elites reproduce less and religious conservatives reproduce more, the nation's ideological map may change. Some analysts already link fertility patterns to political polarization. The paradox is not only biological, it is political. And here we circle back to the core question. Is intelligence still an advantage, or has it become its own trap? The truth may be that intelligence does not guarantee survival. It guarantees options, and options can include self-extinction. If intelligence gives us options, then America is the laboratory where those options play out in extreme form. Nowhere else do we see such a sharp divide between the life of instinct and the life of choice. Walk through rural Texas or Mississippi, and you'll see big families, children playing in yards, churches filled on Sundays. Walk through downtown Manhattan or San Francisco, and you'll meet 30 and 40-somethings with high salaries, brilliant resumes, and not a single child. Same species, same country, radically different strategies for living. Sociologists call this the fertility gap. College-educated Americans average far fewer children than those without degrees. Religious affiliation plays a role too. The more religious a group, the higher its fertility rate. Utah, with its large Mormon population, has birth rates well above the national average. States like Vermont, Massachusetts, and California, wealthy, secular, highly educated, have some of the lowest. It is not just about money. It is about meaning and worldview. The question becomes, who is really shaping the future? The Harvard-trained lawyer with no kids, or the working-class couple with 5? The scientist who mentors students, or the mother raising her children in a small town? Both are shaping it, but in very different currencies. One invests in ideas. The other invests in genes. History offers examples of both strategies. The intellectual elites of ancient Athens produced philosophy, democracy, and art that still resonate. But their population declined sharply compared to neighboring societies, partly because many of their citizens delayed or limited childbearing. Meanwhile, less educated agricultural communities reproduced at higher rates, sustaining their numbers. Ideas survived, but the people who invented them did not always keep pace biologically. America today may be replaying a similar drama. The nation is rich in ideas, technology, and culture, yet its fertility rate keeps falling. The paradox is not abstract. It is lived out in millions of daily choices. Talk to young Americans about their reasons. A 29-year-old software engineer in Seattle says, "I'd like kids, maybe someday, but first I need to feel financially secure." He earns 6 figures, but still doubts he can afford a family. A 32-year-old PhD student in Boston says, "My research is my life. Having a child would mean ending my dream." A couple in Los Angeles say, "We love kids, but this planet is burning. How can we bring a baby into this mess?" Each story is personal, but together they create a social tide. It is not just individuals. Entire industries grow around the child-free lifestyle. Travel companies market to dink couples. Luxury housing in cities caters to singles or pairs with no children. Even advertising reflects it, showing not the nuclear family of the 1950s, but stylish young professionals with pets, friends, and freedom. Culture itself is normalizing the choice not to reproduce. And yet, beneath the surface, anxiety simmers. Demographers warn that a shrinking population brings economic risks. Fewer workers, fewer taxpayers, fewer consumers. The burden of supporting aging generations grows heavier. Japan and South Korea show the extreme. Ultramodern, highly educated societies with collapsing birth rates and shrinking populations. America is not there yet, but it is on the same trajectory. This raises a haunting question. Is intelligence leading nations toward decline? Before jumping to conclusions, consider the psychology of choice. Intelligence is not just problem-solving. It is imagining the future. And the future, when you look closely, is frightening. Climate models predict rising seas and harsher storms. Economic forecasts warn of automation replacing jobs. Political analysts talk about instability and division. For someone who reads and understands these things, having a child can feel less like joy and more like a gamble. The more you know, the heavier the weight of responsibility. Ignorance can be fertile. Knowledge can be sterile. That is Darwin's paradox in a sentence. Philosophers have wrestled with this tension for centuries. The ancient Greeks debated whether bringing children into a suffering world was moral. Schopenhauer argued that existence itself is painful, so not reproducing is a form of compassion. Existentialists like Sartre and Beauvoir claimed that meaning comes from freedom, not biology. Today's child-free intellectuals are heirs to that tradition, even if they don't always know it. But the paradox goes deeper. What if intelligence is not failing evolution, but moving it to a higher level? Richard Dawkins suggested as much. Genes are one form of inheritance, but culture is another. A parent passes DNA. A teacher, writer, or leader passes memes, units of meaning. In a sense, the scientist who never reproduces biologically may still reproduce culturally 1,000-fold. His ideas spread like offspring, mutating and adapting in minds across generations. Take Charles Darwin himself. He had 10 children, but it is his theory, not his genes, that changed the world. Or look at Steve Jobs. He did have biological children, but it is the iPhone, the cultural child, that reshaped billions of lives. By the measure of memes, Jobs fathered entire generations of digital natives. So maybe the paradox is not that smart people don't reproduce. Maybe the paradox is that they reproduce differently. They create ideas, institutions, technologies, movements. Their children are not flesh and blood, but code and culture. Still, biology does not disappear. Demography is destiny, as the saying goes. If educated elites shrink while other groups expand, the cultural balance shifts. Already in the U.S., the fertility gap between secular liberals and religious conservatives is visible in voting patterns. More children are born into conservative households than progressive ones. Over generations, this could tilt the electorate, shaping laws, values, and the nation's identity. Darwin's paradox thus has political teeth. The child-free professor in Brooklyn may shape ideas today, but the family in rural Oklahoma may shape the demographics of tomorrow. And here is where the story gets even stranger. Technology is now entering the equation. Fertility treatments, sperm banks, egg freezing, all allow people to delay childbearing or outsource parts of reproduction. Some futurists imagine artificial wombs or genetic engineering. Intelligence is not only rejecting biology, it is re-engineering it. The paradox is mutating. Picture a near future where elite couples delay children until their 40s, then use IVF and surrogates to create a single designer child. Meanwhile, less affluent families continue to have children naturally and earlier. Two different reproductive strategies coexist. One is high investment, low number. The other is low investment, high number. Nature has seen this pattern before, in animals, in plants. But now it plays out in humans, with intelligence guiding the choices. Will this widen inequality? Possibly. The children of the elite may be fewer, but given every advantage of education and technology. The children of the poor may be more numerous, but with fewer resources. The result is a society stratified not just by wealth, but by fertility strategy. Intelligence has not ended evolution. It has made it more complex. Let's return to the emotional level. Talk to parents, and you'll hear stories of joy and sacrifice. Talk to the child-free, and you'll hear stories of freedom and fulfillment. Both speak truth. There is no single human script anymore. That is the heart of the paradox. For the first time, we are not bound by one story of survival. We can choose, and choice always creates tension. So the question lingers, does choosing not to have children make you less human, or more? Less fit, or differently fit? A Darwinian trap, or an evolutionary leap? The answer depends on how you define survival. Genes or memes? Bodies or ideas? Children or culture? What we know for sure is this. The paradox is reshaping America. You can see it in census data. You can see it in family dinner tables, where siblings choose different paths, one raising 3 kids in the suburbs, another building a career alone in the city. You can see it in politics, in advertising, in art. Intelligence is no longer just a tool for survival. It is a mirror forcing us to ask, what do we want to survive for? And that question may be the most dangerous and liberating of all. Every generation has faced survival questions. For most of human history, those questions were brutal and simple. Will we eat tonight? Will our children survive disease or war? Will the harvest fail? In that world, the question of whether to have children was not really a question. Children were both insurance and workforce. They carried water, worked the fields, supported aging parents. They were necessity. But in modern America, necessity has faded. The child is no longer economic support. The child is emotional project. Parenting is not about survival, but about self-expression. That shift, subtle as it sounds, rewires the psychology of reproduction. Ask a farmer in 1800 why he had 6 kids, and he might say, we needed the help. Ask a Brooklyn lawyer in 2023 why she has none, and she might say, I didn't want to give up my career. The answers are worlds apart, and yet both are rational in context. Evolution has collided with modernity, and the result is choice. Choice, though, is heavy. and intelligence magnifies that weight. The smarter you are, the more variables you see. Parenting becomes not just diapers and bedtime stories, but a chain of complex calculations. Will my child be healthy? Can I afford daycare? Will they have to pay off student loans? What kind of planet will they inherit? For some, the sheer gravity of these questions leads to paralysis. Psychologists have a term for this: analysis paralysis. Too many options create inaction. The paradox is that intelligence, meant to help us choose wisely, can sometimes prevent us from choosing at all. And here, real lives illustrate the pattern. Meet Lisa, a 35-year-old professor at a university in Chicago. She and her partner spent years discussing whether to have kids. They made spreadsheets comparing daycare costs to their salaries. They debated climate change scenarios. They asked themselves whether they could give a child enough attention while still pursuing academic careers. After a decade of discussion, they decided against it. Lisa says, "We thought so hard about it. We thought ourselves out of it." Or consider Mark, a 40-year-old filmmaker in Los Angeles. He says, "I want to make art that outlives me. That is my legacy." For him, a child would compete with that mission. He doesn't see his choice as sacrifice, but as clarity. "I've chosen my children," he says, pointing to his films. Neither Lisa nor Mark feels regret. They feel relief. But what fascinates sociologists is that these kinds of decisions cluster among the educated and urban. The same intelligence that earns degrees and builds careers also interrogates parenthood until the answer becomes no. Meanwhile, in less educated or more religious communities, the choice is simpler, or not perceived as choice at all. Children are blessing, duty, tradition. Analysis paralysis is rare. The decision feels pre-written by faith or culture. And so the paradox emerges. The very capacity to question destiny often leads to rejecting it. This tension echoes an ancient theme. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was cursed with foresight, able to see the future, but powerless to change it. Intelligence, in a way, creates a similar curse. To foresee the problems of the world is to hesitate bringing new life into it. Less foresight can mean more fertility. Now zoom out. At the national level, what does this mean for America's future? Demographers warn of a looming gray wave. By 2034, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, adults over 65 will outnumber children for the first time in history. Social Security and Medicare, built on the assumption of a large workforce supporting the elderly, will strain under the weight. Without enough young people, the system risks collapse. Fertility choices made in bedrooms and living rooms ripple into the economy and politics of the entire nation. But here's the twist: America is not Japan. Immigration offsets some of the decline. Immigrants, on average, have higher fertility rates than native-born Americans. They bring both youth and cultural diversity. In this sense, America's openness to newcomers helps buffer Darwin's paradox. While native elites hesitate, newcomers replenish. The paradox is softened, though not erased. Still, the cultural divide sharpens. Native-born professionals, often secular and liberal, reproduce less. Immigrant families, often more traditional and religious, reproduce more. Over time, this shifts the demographic and cultural fabric. You can already see hints in voting patterns, school systems, even language use. Intelligence reshapes culture, but demography reshapes who inherits that culture. Philosophers might say this is a clash between two kinds of immortality. One is genetic, passing on DNA through children. The other is cultural, passing on meaning through work, ideas, and institutions. Both are valid, but they pull in different directions. Consider Albert Einstein. He had children, but it is his theory of relativity that endures as his true offspring. Contrast that with an anonymous farmer in 1900 who had 8 kids, but left no inventions, no books, no institutions. Whose legacy is greater? It depends on the lens you choose. Through the genetic lens, the farmer may have hundreds of descendants alive today. Through the cultural lens, Einstein reshaped physics, technology, even philosophy. Darwin's paradox forces us to ask, which form of legacy matters more? And here's where things get personal. Every human being must decide which kind of immortality to pursue, or whether to pursue both. Some balance it, raising children while also contributing to art or science. But increasingly, educated Americans feel forced to choose, and many choose culture over biology. This is not necessarily selfishness. In fact, many child-free individuals see their choice as altruism. They argue that by not adding to population growth, they are easing strain on the planet. Others say they are investing their energy in causes that benefit humanity at large. For them, not having kids is not absence but redirection. And yet, there is an undercurrent of unease. Surveys show that many child-free adults face social stigma. Family gatherings can be awkward. Questions like, "When are you having kids?" still sting. Cultural norms evolve slower than individual choices. For some, the paradox is not just biological or philosophical, but social, a negotiation with traditions that haven't caught up. There is also the question of regret. Studies suggest that while most child-free adults report satisfaction, a minority experience regret later in life, especially as peers become grandparents. The fear of loneliness, of having no one to carry on the name, can surface with age. Intelligence may help make the choice, but it cannot guarantee peace with it decades later. So we circle back. Intelligence gives foresight. Foresight gives hesitation. Hesitation reduces fertility. But hesitation also creates room for alternatives, careers, art, activism, mentorship. Darwin's paradox is not only about fewer children. It is about new ways of imagining legacy. In America today, legacy is being redefined in real time. A novelist may see her books as children. A Silicon Valley founder may see his startup as a child. A teacher may see generations of students as her offspring. The metaphor is stretched, but it reveals something profound. Humans have unlocked new ways of reproducing beyond biology. The species is experimenting with immortality itself. The question is whether these new forms can sustain societies the way biological reproduction once did. Can a nation survive on memes without genes? Can culture outlast demography? No civilization has yet proven it. That uncertainty is what makes Darwin's paradox so gripping. It is not just a riddle for biologists. It is a riddle for America's future. Legacy is not an abstract word in America. It shows up at family dinners, in trust funds, in college admissions. Parents ask, "What will I leave behind?" Children are part of that answer, but not the only part anymore. The paradox of modern intelligence is that it offers too many legacies. For much of history, legacy meant children, land, maybe a name carved into a gravestone. Today, it can mean a TED Talk with millions of views, a startup that changes how we communicate, or a social movement that reshapes law. A child is no longer the default vessel of continuity. This is why highly educated Americans often frame their lives differently. They are not rejecting legacy, they are diversifying it. Instead of one genetic lineage, they create multiple cultural ones. A scientist's discovery, a filmmaker's story, a philanthropist's foundation, these become parallel bloodlines of meaning. But here is the irony. Cultural legacy is fragile without biological carriers. An idea may inspire millions, but to endure it must be taught, remembered, passed down. If those who value an idea the most do not reproduce, its survival depends on others adopting it, and others may not. Take secularism. Among American elites, secular values, science, rationalism, humanism, are widespread. But secular families tend to have fewer children than religious ones. Over generations, that creates a demographic tilt toward faith-based worldviews. Surveys already show that while knowns, religiously unaffiliated, are growing through conversion, their growth is slowed by low fertility. In contrast, groups like evangelical Protestants, Catholics, and especially Mormons maintain influence through higher birth rates. Darwin's paradox thus intersects with religion. The less you believe in destiny, the fewer descendants you leave. Politics reflects this too. Progressive, educated Americans tend to have fewer children than conservative, religious Americans. That means each generation inherits not only ideas but demographics that shape the balance of power. The paradox is not neutral, it tilts the playing field. Consider the Supreme Court. Judges are not chosen by fertility, but by politics shaped by generations of voters. If one side of the cultural divide produces more voters biologically, it may outweigh the cultural influence of the other side's ideas. Demography is slow but relentless. Yet culture can leap across bloodlines. A child raised in a religious household may still embrace secular values if exposed to them at school or online. Ideas can adopt hosts the way genes adopt bodies. This is why the paradox has no easy resolution. Genes and memes intertwine, compete, and cooperate in unpredictable ways. Let's step away from politics and back into human stories. Meet Daniel, a 45-year-old child-free architect in San Francisco. He says, "My buildings are my children." He gestures at a high-rise downtown. "When I'm gone, that will stand." For him, immortality is concrete and steel. Now meet Maria, a 42-year-old mother of 4 in rural Texas. She works 2 jobs, struggles with bills, but beams when talking about her children. "They're my world," she says. Her legacy is flesh and blood, laughter and lineage. Both Daniel and Maria are right. Both live authentically, but they embody 2 different solutions to Darwin's paradox. One invests in cultural permanence, the other in biological continuity. Which survives longer is an open experiment. Technology complicates it further. Artificial intelligence, for example, extends cultural legacy in ways never before possible. A writer may die, but her digital works may be preserved indefinitely. A musician may live on through streaming platforms. A thinker's voice can echo through podcasts for centuries. In a sense, AI itself is now a cultural child, inheriting and spreading human knowledge without needing human reproduction. Some futurists even imagine that humans could achieve digital immortality, uploading consciousness into machines. If that ever happens, Darwin's paradox takes on an entirely new dimension. Biological children might become optional, even obsolete. But pause. Before we leap into sci-fi, remember the human core. Children are not only about survival or legacy, they are about love. The child-free often emphasize freedom, but parents emphasize connection. They describe holding a newborn, watching a first step, hearing, "I love you" from a toddler. These moments are not rational calculations. They are primal, emotional, unquantifiable. This is why the paradox is never complete. Even among the educated and hesitant, some still choose children precisely because love outweighs logic. A Harvard-trained doctor may know the climate data, the economic risks, the sacrifices. But then she holds her baby and says, "It was all worth it." Intelligence can argue, but emotion can overrule. And yet, emotion itself is reshaped by culture. In America, the ideal child is expensive. Parents feel pressure to provide the best schools, the safest neighborhoods, extracurriculars, therapy, enrichment. This concerted cultivation, as sociologist Annette Lareau calls it, makes parenting seem daunting to those who think critically. The smarter you are, the more you feel the weight of those expectations. This again leads to hesitation, to fewer children. In earlier generations, children were simply accepted as they came. Today, they are projects to be perfected. That shift is both product and cause of intelligence. So where does that leave us? Perhaps here, Darwin's paradox is not a glitch. It is an evolution of evolution. Intelligence created culture, culture created choice, and choice fractured the ancient link between survival and reproduction. America is living proof. Its most educated, most creative citizens often reproduce less, but their ideas spread farther than their genes. The question is whether those ideas can survive long enough to shape the future, or whether demographics will sweep them aside. History offers caution. The child-free philosophers of Athens inspired centuries, but their society declined. The Roman elite practiced low fertility while their empire was flooded with newcomers. Europe's aristocrats often had fewer heirs while peasants multiplied. Cultural brilliance did not guarantee survival. And yet, the ideas of Athens, Rome, and Europe still shape us. Perhaps both are true. The bodies vanish, the ideas remain. America's paradox, then, is double-edged. On one side, declining fertility threatens its economic and political strength. On the other, cultural fertility remains explosive. Technology, art, science. Which edge cuts deeper is still unknown. And in the middle stands the individual, making choices at kitchen tables, in apartments, in conversations with partners. To have or not to have. To invest in genes or memes. To chase freedom or connection. Darwin's paradox is not only a theory. It is dinner table reality. Imagine sitting across from someone who chose not to have kids and listening without judgment. What you'll hear is rarely a single argument. It's a braided rope of practicalities, anxieties, aspirations, and philosophy. Some threads are economic, daycare costs, health insurance nightmares, student loans. Some are moral, climate anxiety, concerns about inequality. Some are existential, the desire to craft a life that feels wholly owned. These strands tangle differently, depending on where you live and what you value. But the braid is strong, and it pulls many toward the same conclusion: fewer children or none at all. On the national level, the math is blunt. The CDC's provisional data in recent years places the U.S. total fertility rate around 1.6 children per woman, well below replacement level. That is not just a statistic, it is a structural shift. Fewer births mean fewer future workers, fewer taxpayers, and different patterns of generational support. It changes pensions, housing markets, and the very choreography of daily life. An older population needs care. Who will provide it if the young cohorts shrink? But statistics alone miss the inner economics that most people live by. Consider the USDA's widely cited estimate that the cost to raise a child born in 2015 to age 17 runs in the low to mid hundreds of thousands of dollars. The official projected figure historically cited is roughly $233,610 in 2015 dollars, and later estimates adjust for inflation and different expense models. This number reverberates through the choices of millennials and Gen Z. Combine that sticker price with expensive urban housing, and a couple earning a decent salary may still conclude that parenthood is a high-risk investment with uncertain returns. Financial calculus matters. Now at climate anxiety. Surveys from Pew and others show a growing share of young adults cite environmental collapse as a factor in their reproductive intentions. It's not merely alarmism, it's a rational assessment of risk. If you believe sea level rise, extreme weather, and ecological collapse are likely to intensify over decades, the moral calculus of bringing a child into that future changes. In some circles, opting out becomes an ethical stance. Fewer consumers, fewer emissions. This is an intellectual movement as much as a demographic one. Another important angle is opportunity cost, an economics term given human flesh. Education in the U.S. demands long investments. Medical residents, PhD candidates, and lawyers spend their 20s and early 30s building careers. Women with advanced degrees often delay childbearing until biological risk rises. For some, the choice becomes binary: the career you trained for versus the timeline biology imposes. Many decide that the trade-off is not worth it, or at least not yet. The result: later first births, higher rates of infertility interventions, and a cohort effect where entire professional classes have fewer children than preceding generations. Research across countries suggests fertility declines have occurred in educated populations, even beyond what simple economics would predict. Education reshapes desires and timelines in a durable way. But the story is not monolithic. Cultural differences within America produce contrasting reproductive rhythms. Religious communities, Mormons, evangelicals, certain immigrant groups, often have higher fertility. In those milieus, children are framed not just as emotional fulfillment, but as communal duty, spiritual blessing, or cultural continuity. These communities sustain stronger social networks for childcare and procreation. The social infrastructure makes parenting less individual and more collective. In secular urban centers, by contrast, parenthood can feel like a solo mission, which amplifies its costs and risks. Beyond religion and income, social norms shape choices with stealthy power. The normative pressure to be a good parent is intense in many elite circles. Parenting is not just feeding and clothing a child. It is investing in enrichment, college funds, elite activities, and curated childhoods. Sociologists call this trend concerted cultivation. For parents who internalize this ideal, having fewer children feels sensible, quality over quantity. But the result is an arms race. Each generation invests more per child, but the population shrinks. That dynamic concentrates resources into fewer offspring, amplifying social inequality across families and fueling a feedback loop where elite status is maintained through heavy investment in fewer children. Let's put faces to the data. There's Tara, a biotech researcher in Boston. She and her partner both have demanding careers and student debt from graduate school. They plan to wait until their mid-30s to have kids. Then Tara's mentor retired early, and she watched the trade-offs firsthand. Time stolen by late-night grants, the constant guilt of being parent and scholar. Tara froze her eggs, partly as insurance and partly as reassurance, and eventually chose not to have children. She channels her energies into mentoring first-generation college students instead, an act she frames as meaningful legacy work. Across town is Luis, a contractor in a Rust Belt city. He has 4 children, not because he did a cost-benefit analysis, but because family life is central to his identity. His kin network offsets childcare costs. Grandparents help, neighbors help, and the sense of responsibility is shared. For Luis, the future looks like grandchildren on the porch, uncertain but embodied and real. These 2 lives are not better or worse. They are different solutions to the same human problem: how to persist. The child-free may nurture future citizens through education and culture. The child-rich may sustain numerical continuity and family networks. Both have strengths. Both produce different social goods. It is tempting to treat Darwin's paradox as evidence that intelligence is maladaptive. But that would be too simple. Intelligence does not only calculate costs, it creates new currencies of success. The mimetic view, Richard Dawkins' idea that ideas replicate, helps here. A researcher who seeds a field with seminal work may, through students and influence, shape multiple generations. An entrepreneur who founds a company changes livelihoods at scale. In these cases, cultural reproduction can rival genetic reproduction in its effects on a society's trajectory. Still, mimetic reproduction depends on adoption. Ideas need hosts, people who absorb, enact, and transmit them. If the demographic carriers of certain ideas are shrinking, those ideas must cross cultural boundaries to survive. That is not impossible. It happens frequently. Children born into traditional households adopt secular ideas in schools. Immigrants assimilate to broader norms. Yet demography tilts the odds. Ideas favored by larger, higher fertility communities have a built-in demographic advantage. Technology further complicates the picture. Assisted reproductive technologies allow postponement and control. Egg freezing, IVF, and surrogacy enable would-be parents to delay and plan, creating a modality where elites can defer reproduction until they can afford it on their terms. But these technologies are expensive, often accessible primarily to wealthy individuals, potentially creating a stratified reproductive landscape. Fewer, high-investment births among the wealthy. More, low-investment births elsewhere. That pattern could amplify inequality in the long run, as concentrated resources yield children with better educational and health outcomes. The political implications are already being felt. Policymakers worried about fertility decline consider subsidies for families, expanded parental leave, childcare infrastructure, and even baby bonuses. But such policies often target the practical side of the decision, not the philosophical one. They address cost and logistics, but do not by themselves change the deeper value judgments about climate, meaning, or personal fulfillment. If a significant share of people opt out on principle because they simply do not want to have kids, economic incentives will have limited effect. Yet culture is not static. Values shift over time, interactions occur, and feedback loops change. Child-free movements normalize non-parenthood, while family-centered communities continue to value children highly. Demography and culture dissociate and recouple in various ways. One possibility is a hybrid future, modest overall fertility combined with higher investments per child, along with sustained immigration, keeping population levels viable. Another possibility is a deeper demographic shift that reorients political and cultural majorities. Both futures are plausible, both are consequential. Underlying all of this is the human question of meaning. Why do we want to be remembered? For many, the answer is relational: children, grandchildren, lineage. For others, it is creative: books, institutions, art, scientific insights. Darwin's paradox forces us to interrogate these desires. Why do we choose one form of immortality over another? How do we reconcile love with foresight, duty with freedom? These are not merely academic musings. They are questions people ask aloud in hospital rooms, in apartments, at church halls, and at kitchen tables. The answers shape neighborhoods, economies, and the arc of history. When this scene plays out in America, land of both limitless options and deep inequalities, it becomes a vivid experiment in human selfhood. Darwin gave us a model for biological selection. Our job now is to watch how cultural selection, technological intervention, and personal meaning-making rewrite the future. The next act is unfolding now, one life choice at a time. Picture the year 2100. Imagine standing in a crowded megacity where skyscrapers hum with neon, drones dart across the sky, and languages blend into a planetary chorus. Whose children are running through those streets? Which ideas dominate the classrooms, the songs, the algorithms that shape daily life? That question is being answered right now, in quiet apartments and noisy kitchens, in boardrooms and bedrooms. Darwin's paradox is not a puzzle of the past. It is the architecture of the future. Every generation imagines it is at the edge of history. But in America, this feeling has teeth. Birth rates sink, technology accelerates, ideologies collide. The stakes are not abstract. They are coded into the DNA of tomorrow's citizens, and just as much into the memes and stories that shape them. Whether a culture multiplies biologically or culturally, whether it thrives by sheer numbers or by transformative ideas, will decide not just who survives, but what survives. Consider this: if the most educated continue to opt out of parenthood, but their ideas spread through institutions, the internet, and cultural exports, then America may seed the world with thought even as it struggles with demographics at home. If, on the other hand, communities that prize high fertility retain cultural cohesion, then their children may inherit disproportionate influence, simply by being there to vote, to work, to create families of their own. Neither trajectory is guaranteed, but both are real. That tension echoes an ancient truth: evolution is not fair, nor is it linear. The strongest idea does not always win. Sometimes the most fertile group does. History's museum is filled with lost philosophies, forgotten gods, abandoned languages. At the same time, fragile ideas, like democracy, human rights, or science, have survived through unlikely odds because they leapt across bloodlines. This double helix of culture and biology is winding tighter and tighter in our century. And within that helix, each person is a thread. Your choice, whether to have children or not, whether to pass on values through genes or memes, contributes to the unfolding shape of tomorrow. That realization is both humbling and electrifying. You are not a spectator. You are a participant in evolution's next chapter. Here is the paradox's secret twist: it isn't only about survival of the fittest. It's about survival of the storytellers. The people who decide to speak, to share, to pass on what they believe, ensure their worldview travels forward. In that sense, Even if you never raise a child, you can still raise a legacy. Every conversation, every book, every video. These are cultural children, carrying fragments of you into the next century. And that is where we arrive at this very moment, together. You're not just listening to a voice. You are participating in a chain of thought stretching from Darwin's notebook to the glow of your screen. If this story resonated with you, if it made you question or sparked a new idea, then you've already felt the pull of legacy in action. But here's the hook. Ideas only survive if they are shared. Just as genes need bodies to replicate, ideas need communities. When you subscribe, when you hit like, you are not just helping an algorithm. You are strengthening a lineage of curiosity, of questioning, of refusing to take the world for granted. You are ensuring that this conversation doesn't vanish into the digital void, but continues to echo, to gather others, to grow. Think of that click not as a trivial gesture, but as a tiny evolutionary act. You're giving survival advantage to ideas that challenge, that provoke, that dare to look at the strange paradoxes of being human. You become part of the experiment. And who knows, maybe decades from now, someone else will trace their journey of thought back to this moment, this story, and you will have been the unseen ancestor of their curiosity. So, as we close the chapter on Darwin's paradox, remember, the future is not written by destiny. It is written by choices. Some people choose children, some choose ideas, some choose both. But all of us choose whether to engage, whether to connect, whether to keep the conversation alive. If you want a future where thought thrives, where complexity is embraced, where we dare to face paradox instead of hiding from it, then join this journey. Subscribe, like, share. Not for vanity metrics, but because you believe ideas matter. Because, in a way, that act is itself a form of parenthood, birthing a future that is more curious, more aware, more alive. This paradox is not a dead end. It's an invitation. And you, right now, hold the pen.